To this podcast, the Heidelcast.
It's a Heidel Minicast. And now, Scott Clark.
Education True and False, Part 1.
If the Heidelcast helps you, won't you help us keep it going? Please make the coffer clink by clicking on the PayPal link or by sending a check to Heidelberg Reformation Association, 1637 East Valley Parkway, number 391, Escondido, California, 92027.
What is education?
The Heidelcast.
Americans are busy people who continue to conquer a big place which has, since the 18th century, offered wealth and great influence to those who work hard and who produce a product or service valued by others. Education, per se, however, in America, has not always been valued for itself. Presently, undergraduate education is highly valued, judging by what the market is willing to pay, as a means to future success, although maybe that's in question now, isn't it? Judging by her graduates, what's being sold to the student is not always education, at least not as that idea has been traditionally defined. What the culture values is the economic result of having attended an undergraduate school and having obtained a credential. I just heard a talk show host yesterday, I think, say that she didn't learn anything in her undergraduate education and it didn't think it had any value for her employment, for her job. Well, she's a talk show host. You know what she does? Talks about things in the news. You know what that requires? General knowledge. And as I listen to the show, I enjoy the sort of interchange between the two hosts, and they have a good chemistry. But as I listen to her, sometimes I think, well, you didn't learn a lot, did you? But of course, she's drawing on her education all the time, and she actually is benefiting from her education more than she realizes. But I thought it was striking to hear someone whose job it is to discuss current events say that she learned nothing in her education that actually helps her in her job. Maybe that's true. I doubt it, but it's possible. I won't say where she went to school. Anyway, evangelicals, and I think too many Reformed people, are children of this anti-intellectual culture, and they too often look at the training of pastors in the same way. They like the credential and the license that it brings to serve the church, but they don't really seem to care for the process or even the substance of education as much as they want the credential. Right? Credentialism is an American disease. This antipathy for genuine education appears in a variety of ways, but one way in which it has manifested itself is in the proliferation of ad hoc seminaries, where the faculty is unqualified, not residential, or in some cases, non-existent. The problem is, since many undergraduates haven't received a proper education either in high school or in college, as they're considering where to attend seminary, they're poorly prepared to evaluate what constitutes a good seminary education. For starters, they don't know what the marks of a true school are. So let me propose 3: genuine learning, genuine faculty, and proper recognition. So genuine learning. Without genuine learning, there can be no true education. And by learning, I don't mean only or primarily the dissemination and accumulation of information. This is what many students think or have been taught to think that education is. This class of student thinks that the teacher is in possession of information and that the student must have that information in order to complete the course and get on with the real work of ministry. The information collector sits in class and busily transcribes, almost always by computer, every word from the teacher's mouth without stopping to evaluate the character or significance of what's being said. Every word is treated as if it were as important as every other word. When the information stops flowing, the collector stops typing. Analysis, if it occurs, is delayed to an end-of-term cram session. By the way, this is why I've come to really stress to my students that if at all possible, they should take notes by hand. Students who take notes by hand, and there's good evidence to support this claim, students who take notes by hand do much better than the students who transcribe on a computer and then try to cram all that material about which they've given no thought until the last week of the semester or in the few days they have to study for finals. Nor do I mean moving to the other end of the spectrum, as I learned from Thomas de Zengotita, and as I'm being reminded by Jean M. Twang's Generation Me, what the narcissist assumes. The narcissist is the sovereign arbiter of what is to be known, what should be learned, and what, if anything, shall be learned in class. If the teacher's goals match up with the narcissist's, so much better for the teacher. No, by genuine learning, I mean memorizing the grammar, understanding the logic, and mastering the rhetoric of a discipline.
Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Clark.
The Idlecast.
The grammar is the basic stuff of any intellectual enterprise. In my discipline, church history and historical theology, the grammar is composed of the facts of the biography, the circumstances, and the intellectual history of a given person, episode, or even a movement. For example, it's impossible to study the Council of Nicaea without understanding when the council met, why it met, and under what circumstances it met. These things must be mastered before one can analyze the significance of the council and its product, which is the Nicene Creed, of course. Genuine learning considers the internal structure of a discipline, both in general and in particular. Thus, the student of history must understand how history itself works and how and why things unfolded in any particular case. Third, a student must learn the language of a discipline, that is, how to talk about it intelligently and even how to explain it to others. If you cannot explain something to someone else, how well do you understand it yourself? Probably not very well. Yes, there is intuitive knowledge, but schools can't measure intuition. And listeners, when they go to explain that to other people, aren't going to benefit very much from their intuition. Finally, a genuine education requires a student to think well and clearly, to be stretched, to develop critical faculties. More than once, I've heard from students in various schools that they chose this or that school because, in effect, they were sure that the school would not challenge them to rethink or even think through their convictions. In other words, those students chose a school because they were confident that it would reinforce their existing convictions or even validate their prejudices. So let me illustrate. I recall some years back receiving a paper from a student in order to be excused from a preliminary course, which proposed to show that a view propounded by a professor was wrong. Doesn't matter what the issue was, except that it was on an issue on which there are a variety of reasonable, well-grounded views and about which there's no clear unanimity among the orthodox. Now, this student may have been correct in his conclusion, but what troubled me was that this student knew the correctness of his conclusion before he had ever engaged in a thorough or careful study of the matter. The student hadn't learned a syllable of Greek or Hebrew or any other ancient languages or modern European languages for that matter. He hadn't engaged with any higher level critical study of the issue in any way, and he wasn't really capable of doing so. But he was undeterred in his confidence. It never occurred to him that he might be wrong, or that he could be wrong, or that there might be things that he needed to learn before coming to ironclad conclusions. A year or two later, he transferred to a school where he was confident that his certainty would not be disturbed, and I guess his confidence was well placed, I don't know. But I don't think that that approach constitutes genuine learning. Real learning is often painful because it requires a student to put to death familiar and cherished notions and to confront new and unfamiliar ones. It causes self-examination, and that can be painful. It requires not only the acquisition of new skills, and that's difficult, but also the formation of new ways of thinking, which is never easy. True education is a countercultural undertaking. One has to break from the prevailing culture of busyness and enterprise, whether commercial or religious, in order to become educated, because real learning takes time, it takes patience, and it takes sacrifice. Stay tuned. Next time we'll talk about a proper faculty.
Thanks for listening. Tune in tomorrow for more from the Heidelcast, brought to you by Heidelberg Reformation Association.org. Don't forget, when the coin in the coffer clinks, the cost of bandwidth shrinks. Copyright Heidelberg Reformation Association. All rights reserved. This is a Heidel Media production.
The best podcast. The Idlecast.